let's start the discussion on aggregate demand. Aggregate demand, again, another title that we really discuss these days. Right? In fact, whenever government wants to make decision, government looks at the aggregate demand. So since we know the demand, it is easy to digest the aggregate demand. Right? In the demand, we said that is the total demand in the market. So we are having different customers for a particular good or a service in microeconomics. For a particular good or a service, we have different quantities demanded at different prices. Right? Then in aggregate demand, what we do, we are looking. Okay, that is as I said, when we say aggregate demand, that's the total demand from the economy. All the people, how much they are going to spend, how much of goods and services altogether they are demanding. That is what we are going to discuss with the aggregate demand. In fact, when we discuss about the aggregate demand, we can explain why there is a GDP growth or why there's a contraction in GDP. We say fluctuations, right? So why the economy fluctuate? Sometimes we have the increase, sometimes we have the decrease. So theoretically, we can explain why these fluctuations are happening using the aggregate demand. And there we have one more assumption, that is GDP, GNP, GNI, we put all these together and call national income, like NI, right? So we denote that as Y. So in this aggregate demand analysis, when we say Y, it may be GDP, it may be GNP, or it may be NI, but anyway, we say the national output, total production of the economy, which is equal to Y. And then we have another assumption, that is wages and prices are fixed. So wages will not be changed and prices also will be changed. There's no inflation at present. Of course, later we'll relax. In the beginning, we assume that prices and wages are fixed. And also, we assume that unemployment is there. Unemployment in the sense it is involuntary, not willing. People are looking for jobs, but they are not having enough jobs. That kind of unemployment is there in the economy. Why we are having these examples, the assumptions? Because we are using a model called model of income determination. Model of income determination is employed in this aggregate demand discussion. This model was proposed by Keynes. Probably you may have heard Keynesian economics. Now we are having a different branch of economics called Keynesian economics. So that Keynes, or the J.M. Keynes or John Maynard Keynes, he proposed this model of income determination under the book General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, which is published in 1936. Right? Quite older, but still it is valid for today's discussion. Even if you want the Sri Lankan scenario, we can employ the model of income determination and say why we are having our economic contraction or the recession today. Under this model, Keynes discuss about two types of outputs, like potential output and actual output. For any economy, there will be a potential output. Potential output is the output that is the economy would produce if all the factors of production are fully employed. Simply, the potential output means what is the total output if we employ all our production factors to the maximum level, 100%. If we employ all our production factors to the 100% level, what is the total output? This is given by potential output level. In fact, when we say this full employment, there can be unemployment, which is natural. We call natural unemployment. Previously, I said involuntarily. There is no involuntary unemployment, but voluntary unemployment will be there. Voluntary mean natural unemployment, because for any economy, the labors may be changing from one place to the other. So there's a waiting period. And also once you graduated, you will have seeking period. Likewise, therefore, for any economy like US and UK, we are having 4 to 5% of unemployment, which cannot be cured, eliminated. Right? We say if economy is around 4% to 5% of unemployment, we are in full employment, because that is the natural unemployment. So that natural unemployment can be there under potential output. Actual output means what is the level of output we actually receive for the particular period. It may be less than the potential output, because we may be having some unemployment. Right? So that is what Keynes argued. And he argued that there will be unemployment. Therefore, there will be a difference between potential output and actual output. So then he had the argument, the actual output is determined by the demand, aggregate demand. If there's a problem in the economy, that will be happening because of lesser aggregate demand. Right? Because the level of output will be determined by the aggregate demand, the total demand. If the total demand is getting decreased, that economy will have a recession. If the total demand is getting increased, then that country will have an economic boom. That is what Keynes argued between this potential and actual output. We can see how it happens with his model, right? So let's start with no government, no international trade, the simple closed economy. If you remember the circular flow, in a simple closed economy, we had only the households and the firms, no public sector, no international trade. So aggregate demand will be equal to the consumption, because in the basic model we had the consumption. Total demand from the households will be made for the consumption, and then we have the leakage which got into the system again as an injection with investment. So therefore investment demand will be there. So we say if there is a simple economy, simple closed economy, where we are not having the government sector as well as not the international trade, we say aggregate demand equal to C plus I, consumption plus investment. It is the first equation we can generate. Aggregate demand equal to consumption plus investment. Consumption, again, we can define it as a function where consumption equal to this small c plus alpha times y, which says total consumption equal to some consumption which is even income equal to 0. So this can be 0, but still there will be a consumption. Right? That is the 0 consumption at 0 income. This is very true because, you know, any country, or let's forget about any country, any person or any household will spend some money for consumption even without any income. 0 income, still we need to survive. Otherwise we die. Therefore, what we do, whatever the savings that we are having in the bank will be withdrawn. Or we will be having some borrowings. So these borrowings as well as withdrawal will put some money for the consumption. So therefore, we have some consumption, even income 0. So which is given by this small c. Then this alpha tells us if we increase output by 1 unit, what is the change in consumption? Let's say we are getting additional 1 rupee as the national income. If the national income is increased by 1 rupee, what is the level of increment in consumption given by alpha? Technically, we say this as MPC, or marginal propensity to consume. Remember that Very well. MPC, marginal propensity to consume. Marginal concept that we have already learned. Propensity to consume means when you increase your national output by 1 rupee, what is the change in the consumption, which is given as marginal propensity to consume. So with this equation, we can define consumption equal to this small c, that is consumption at 0 plus alpha times 1. Now, the same way we can define the savings. Saving function equal to small s, which is the saving at 0 income level. Of course, this will be this savings, but let's say it can be a negative value. But we say savings. Small s means savings at 0 income, and beta, that stands to the coefficient, which gives that if y increase by 1 unit, what is the change in s? Right? So we say marginal propensity to save, or MPS. So there are two concepts, MPC and MPS. MPC means marginal propensity to consume, which is the level of consumption if we increase income by 1 unit. MPS, marginal propensity to save, which tells us what is the saving if we increase our output by 1 unit. Anyway, with these two equations, in consumption and savings, we can say this alpha plus beta equal to 1. Because if we get 1 rupee, we have only two things to do. If there is no international trade, if there is no public sector, then when we get 1 rupee, we can do only two things. Either to consume, which is given by the alpha, or to save that as a leakage. Right? So either we can save it or consume that. Therefore, if we get 1 rupee, that will be divided between alpha and beta. So therefore, we can simply say alpha plus beta equal to 1. If we know alpha plus beta equal to 1, we can easily replace this value to the beta here. Right? Because beta equal to 1 minus alpha. We can put this alpha here, so 1 minus alpha equal to beta. Right? Therefore, instead of beta, we can replace here 1 minus alpha. Right? So this will be, saving will be equal to, that small c will be minus c here. That is, the c, or the consumption at 0 income, will be defined by this savings or withdrawals from the banks or the borrowings. So therefore, we can put, instead of s, we can put minus c plus 1 minus alpha times 1. So we will be getting back to this equation later. And then total output of the country, that again equal to consumption plus saving. Whatever we produce in the economy, the demand is equal to for the consumption plus investment. The aggregate demand equal to consumption plus investment. The same way, aggregate supply will be equal to consumption plus savings. That is the consumption and the leakage. Right? So using this equation, we can define the consumption function. Right? Consumption function which at 0. That is the consumption at 0 income. So our income can be 0, but still we have some consumption, which is given by C. And then consumption will be increasing with the increase of national income, which is given by this equation, which is small c plus alpha y. Right? So this is the consumption function. Saving function, that is the inverse of the consumption function. And we are having consumption function here, so we are getting the inverse of that. So what we get, instead of c, we get minus c. Instead of alpha, we get 1 minus alpha. So this is the saving function. Saving function, which is equal to small minus c plus 1 minus alpha times y, which we discussed previously. So we are having these two functional forms with the savings and the consumption. And then let's get into the aggregate demand. I said previously aggregate demand equal to consumption plus investment. For the simplicity, let's assume investment is given. So in this case, I will be equal to I bar. I bar means I is fixed. Investment is fixed. It is nothing to do with the economy. It is determined by the outside. Let's assume if income, the investment is determined by the outside to the system, then we can rewrite our equation aggregate demand equal to consumption, which is determined by the system. So it's a variable. Plus I bar. I bar is the investment, which is determined by the savings. Nothing to do with the economic system. So savings will determine the investment. Therefore, investment is fixed as I bar. So we can write AD equal to C plus I bar. Then we know C. C equal to small c plus alpha y, which we defined previously. So AD equal to small c plus alpha times y plus I bar. Then aggregate demand equal to, we can take these two constants. C is a constant, I bar is a constant. So we put C plus I bar as the constant or the intercept times plus alpha times y. Okay, so then we can put the constant, two constants together, C plus I bar plus alpha times y. Then using that information, we can redefine our consumption function. So consumption function, we had something like this. C, small c, plus alpha times y. Then since we introduce investment or the I bar, which is given up to this level, we can add this I bar to C. Then our intercept will not be C, it will be C plus I bar. And so now we are having new intercept here, C plus I bar. And there is no any change in alpha. So it is C plus I bar, which is given by C plus I bar, C plus I bar, which is given here, plus alpha times y. So the slope is the same. Therefore, we get new consumption or the aggregate demand line like this. And then if we know our aggregate demand is like this, we can see how an economy gets into equilibrium, like what we saw with our demand and supply analysis. When we had the demand and supply analysis, we got into the equilibrium point where we are having no excess demand or excess supply. The same concept you can put here in a different way. That is, we are having the aggregate demand, which we defined previously, this one, small c plus I bar plus alpha times y. This is given by aggregate demand. So when we have the aggregate demand like this, we put 45 axis line here, which is dividing the this, because this is 90. So we put the 45. We are having two sides equally. So there we are putting two aggregate demand here and aggregate supply here. National output is here, and here we are putting the desired spending. So then if you take a point like E1 with the aggregate demand given here, at the point E1, aggregate demand is AD1, whereas aggregate supply is Y1. So aggregate demand is higher than the aggregate supply. So you are having a higher demand in the economy than the supply. So what we can do? So higher aggregate demand will increase the demand for labor. Let's assume we are only production factor is labor. So it will increase the demand for labor. That will provide more money to the laborers. So laborers will increase their demand further. That will increase aggregate demand further. And firms will start producing more and more. So we call that as heating up the economy. The economy is heating up. When you have a higher aggregate demand than the supply, your economy will start heating up. So when the economy gets heated up, what will happen? We are producing at Y1. In this case, let's say this is N1 the employment of the labor will be N1 amount, which is less than the optimum level of labor, which is called full employment. Right? So full employment will be at N, whereas now economy is settled at N1. So unemployment is there. If economy heated up like this, aggregate demand will be further increased, our output will be further increased. So the demand for labor also will be further increased. So this is what happens if we are in a point like E1, which is to the left-hand side of this Y is optimum level of output, like what we discussed in the production process. Then if you are at the point like E2, your economy is like in the point E2, where aggregate demand is less than the aggregate supply. Your aggregate supply is now higher, and your economy is at N, which is higher than N star, which is more than the full employment. Because of your aggregate demand, your output has gone more than the full employment. So when it goes more than the full employment, what happens? You will have to bear overtime cost. People will not work more than that. So then we have to pay more money, more salaries, like overtime payments. So then what happens? Your aggregate demand further decreases. Then the firms will decrease the demand for labor. That will decrease the aggregate demand further. Decreasing aggregate demand further will decrease the labor demand further. Your national output will be decreased until you get into Y star. So this simply says, like that profit maximizing output level, this simply says Y economy will be at the equilibrium here, where aggregate demand equal to aggregate supply. At the point where aggregate demand equal to aggregate supply, at that point, our economy will be in the full employment. So Keynes said our economies are always or mostly, because he started this theory because of 1933 Great Depression, like what we are experiencing today in Sri Lanka. In 1933, that was the situation for the whole world. Because of a fuel price, whole world embraced one economic recession. So every country having the problem. So unemployment was natural. So what Keynes said, our economy is in unemployment. Therefore, what we need to do, we need to increase the aggregate demand. If we increase the aggregate demand, that will increase the national output. So we get into the full employment, our output will be increased. So this is known as economic growth or growth in GDP, positive change in GDP. And this is happening because of increasing aggregate demand. So simply what we need to do, if we need to increase the economic growth, we need to increase the aggregate demand. That is what Keynes basically argued. Now, how we can do that? If we want to increase the aggregate demand, if it is a closed, simple economy, what can we do? We can, what Keynes said, we can change the investment. If we change the investment demand, there will be a higher demand for our labor. That will increase the labor demand, and output will be increased until we get into the full employment. That was the argument with the Keynes. Right? So the change in investment demand will change the level of output. Why it is happening? It is because Keynes said entrepreneurs, they are behaving like, or the managers, they are behaving with the animal spirit. And animal spirit means always they make decisions based on the optimism or the pessimism about the future. That is very true. Now in Sri Lanka, there is no any investment at present because all the people are pessimists and they are worrying about their future. So nobody is going to invest any money in Sri Lanka. So this is why we say we need a change. We need a system which is accepted by everyone. If it is accepted by everyone, then the investors will come because they behave like animals. You just take a dog. If you just walk along a road, simple, without anything in your hand, a dog will come and start barking at you. And if you try to run, he will come and bite you, definitely. At the same time, if you turn back and take a log or a stone, the dog will escape from the place because that is the behavior of the animal. Same if you take an elephant or a bull or a buffalo, they behave the same way. About the optimism and the pessimism, they are perceiving. If they feel like that guy is going to attack, they will quickly get back. Right? So what Keynes said, business people or the managers, they behave like animals with the animal spirit. Always they take the decision with the optimism and the pessimism they hold about their future. So with that concept, we can get investment into our model and see what is happening in the output. So you see, now we are having our original aggregate demand with I1. I1 is the initial investment level. With the initial investment level, we had AD curve. And this is the equilibrium point which I previously mentioned. So AD equal to Y. Output equal to aggregate demand equal to national output. But remember, in this scenario, our labor force is not N star. N star says full employment, and we are in unemployment. So that is the situation which said the economy is in unemployment, and aggregate is at aggregate AD star in the equilibrium level. So we are in a trap. We cannot go for full employment, so output is less than our potential. Actual output will be less than the potential output. Then what we can do? So what we can do, we can increase the investment somehow, maybe decreasing the interest rates, or maybe giving some subsidies to the investors, or government itself, or in this case, no government. So therefore, let's say we need to keep the interest rate decrease. So we will change our investment by this much somehow. So when we change I to I2, then my aggregate demand will be shifting leftward like this to AD1. Initially it was AD with I1, now it is AD1 with I2. Right, so we're having a higher aggregate demand. So when we are having a higher aggregate demand, what will happen? So our aggregate demand will go up to AD1. And our output will be increased to Y1. So we have new equilibrium output level because this is cutting through the 45 axis. So we are having Y star 1, new equilibrium level of the output. And at that output, we are in the full employment. In fact, that is what we need to do. So this is the policy in many situations the Rajapaksa regime took. If you want to analyze the Sri Lankan economic scenario, the Rajapaksa regime thought in the line with the Keynesian economics. Right? So it assumed that the problem is with the aggregate demand. So what we need to do? Either we need to put the government expenditure, we need to put the government investment, or we need to reduce the tax rates, we need to reduce the interest rates. Thereby, we can increase the aggregate demand. When we increase the aggregate demand, we will be having higher GDP growth rate because our output will be increased with the full up to the full employment level. In fact, that is the argument even Keynes had. And you can see here, this is the investment was changed. And this is the change in the output. So output change is very much higher than the investment change. So therefore, what we need to do, we need to try to increase the investment with a certain amount. If you increase the investment, your output will be increased more than the increase in the investment, which is discussed with the income multiplier. The reason for this change, when you change this much, output is changed this much. The reason for that, or the equation for this change, is known as income multiplier, which says when you change your investment with a certain amount, your output will be changing more than that. So for that, we can, we can simply calculate that value and say it. This is because we have the equation y equal to c plus I bar. Then we replace c with this consumption function, c plus alpha y. And then we can take this alpha y to the other side. And y minus alpha y equal to c plus I bar. Then we can take y out. So remaining will be 1 minus alpha equal to c plus I bar. So then we take y and shift this 1 minus alpha to the other side. So it will be c divided by 1 minus alpha plus I bar divided by 1 minus alpha. Now let's get the first order derivatives to see the change. Because first order derivatives will show us if we change I bar with a small amount, what is the change in the output. So we get dy by di. So dy means equation y, we get the first order derivatives of equation y with respect to I bar. I hope now you have done the mathematics, so you know the meaning of derivatives. So then we can easily get the slope. Slope will be 1 by 1 minus alpha, because we are having I bar power to 1. So that will be going off. So finally we will be having 1 divided by 1 minus alpha. Right, so dy by di bar equal to 1 divided by 1 minus alpha, which is known as income multiplier, which can be given here. Alpha, that is MPC, marginal propensity to consume. That says that if we increase our output by 1 unit, investment by 1 unit, our output will be changed 1 divided by 1 minus MPC. So 1 minus MPC, that is 1 minus alpha, which is equal to beta. So you can put 1 divided by beta or 1 divided by MPC if you want. So I have done a very simple calculation here. That is, if MPC is given as 0.75, which says if you are getting 1 more rupee, 75 cents will be used for consumption and 25 will be saved. So then, if we know MPC as 0.75, then what is the change in investment? What is the change in output if we change investment by 1 unit? Right? Very, very simple. If you change your investment by 1 unit, what is the change in your national output? Given MPC equals 0.75, which can be measured. We can have a survey and get the idea what is MPC. So now we know MPC, it is 0.75, which says 75% of your increased income will be spending on consumption. So now we can calculate this income multiplier will be equal to 1 divided by 1 minus alpha, which is equal to 4. This says when investment is changed by 1 unit, when investment is changed by 1 unit, output by 4 units. And so in this graph, if you change your investment by 1 unit, your output will be changed by 4 units, which is known as stone ripple effect. If stone ripple effect means when you take a flat stone and throw on the surface of the water body, then it will be like flipping. You will give only 1 hit. That hit will be going into several flips. So this is known as stone ripple effect. So in our economy, we have the stone ripple effect. Why we are having that stone ripple effect? It is because we have the circular flow. You change only investment by one, but that investment will increase the supply. Increase in supply will increase the demand for labor. Demand for labor will increase the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand increase the price. Increasing price will increase the optimism with the producers. Producers will produce more. Likewise, this will be moving again and again and again until we saturation. Saturation will be at 4. If you change your investment by 1 unit, you will be having 4 units of increased output in your national output. Okay, before getting into the income multiplier with the public sector, the basic idea which I wanted to convey here is that we can change, according to Keynes, we can change the aggregate demand. There are several ways of changing aggregate demand. One way of them is increasing the investment. If you increase the investment, your output will be increased more than that, which is given by the income multiplier. That depends on the MPC. So in this case, MPC is 0.75. If MPC is 0.75, increase investment by 1 unit, our output increased by 4. Now at home, what you can do as a homework, you can change the MPC. What is happening? If you put MPC like 90%, the situation in Sri Lanka, we are consuming more than the savings. So then what is happening? What is happening to our final output? If MPC is decreased to like 0.4, like in Japan, then what is happening to our output? So in the simple model that we discussed previously, we had no government sector. But government sector is an important sector in the economy, which is contributing more than 15% of the total economy. In Sri Lanka, it will be much more than that. On average, we say that public sector is responsible for more than 50% in any economy. So it is very important to study about the government sector. So when we are going to study about the government sector, we are having government spending, which is G, given by G. And then we are having injection to the circular flow. Right? G, for the G, which is an injection, because G is spending from the government side. Government will spend money that will take some money from the people and come that to the economy as an injection. And then government takes taxes from the public that will be draining of some money from the system. So we have taxes, then we take money from the people and put that out as the tax. So tax will be a leakage from the system, and government spending, which is G, will be an injection to the system when we introduce the public sector to the simple model. So the government spending on goods and services and the tax policies are known as fiscal policy. These days, again, we are discussing a lot of on fiscal policy. So fiscal policies are used to encourage the economic activities or discourage the economic activities. If we are not reaching to our, if we had not reached our potential output, or the actual output is less than the potential output, then what we do? We get fiscal policy. Government spending will be high, tax will be low. And thereby what we are trying to do, we are trying to reach to a point which we were unable to reach previously. Right? So the government spending G and taxes are important in these fiscal policies. Then we get the government budget, which is the difference between the spending and income. how we get the spending to the government. That is from the income. So if there's a gap between spending and income, then we say there's a budget deficit. Again, which is very much concerned in Sri Lanka because we are having budget deficit for the last 40, 50 years, which says spending is higher than the income. Of course, there's a reason for that. That is, we wanted to achieve that potential output. Right? To get the potential output, we had to increase our expenditure. Government income is usually coming from the taxes. Right? If the government taxes are significantly low, there will be the difference between tax and the tax and expenditure. Right? So this is what even we discussed in the previous presentation which I made to you. In Sri Lanka, we are having a huge deficit because our income tax is really low. And when the new government came into power, I mean the Gotabaya Rajapaksa came into power, he reduced the tax rate. So that increased the gap further because when there's a gap between income and expenditure, we have the huge budget deficit. When we are having a higher budget deficit, how we are going to finance that? We have to borrow. We have to borrow from the local institutions as well as foreign institutions, right? Or foreign governments or the foreign bond markets. Again, Sri Lanka had the same problem. We had a huge gap between income and expenditure. Budget deficit was so significant for a longer period of time. We tried to finance this gap using the money borrowed from the domestic and international sources, which is known as national debt. So national debt is significantly high. Now let's see what will happen when we are having this budget deficit. For that, we can use the government sector. Our aggregate demand, when we introduce the public sector, our aggregate demand will be C plus I, which we had previously, plus government spending. Total demand of the economy will be the consumption of the household, investment of the firm or the investment demand from the firms, and the government expenditure on goods and services. So then, like previously, we assume investment as well as government expenditure is not a function of output. Those are externally determined. Right? So investment will be determined by the savings, and the government expenditure or the budget deficit will be determined by the government. So therefore, I and G we assume as are given. They are given. So therefore, aggregate demand equal to C plus I bar plus G bar. So we are having new aggregate demand curve. When we introduce the public sector into our economy, there's a problem. That is, we cannot spend as we want because government is taking some money from us. So the Y is the national income. National income cannot be totally spent on consumption or investment because some of the money will be draining off as a leakage to the government, which is the tax. So therefore, we have a new concept. Instead of Y, now we are having a new concept called YD, which is called disposable income. That is the income that individual can dispose after giving tax to the government. So we provide the tax to the government, and then we see the remaining in our hand. And also government gives subsidies. Right? Instead of tax, sometimes government gives the tax subsidies. So subsidies should be also incorporated into the income when we are getting the YD. So YD or the disposable income can be denoted as 1Y minus NT. NT means the net tax, as I previously mentioned. National output or the disposable output equal to national output minus net tax. Net tax equal to tax minus transfers, which we discussed previously. So let's assume we are having only income tax. There is no good and services tax. We are having only income tax. If it is the case, we can rewrite NT as T times Y. T is the net tax rate. That is, if we allocate some value for the subsidies minus tax, then small t stands for net tax rate. Simply, let's say this is the tax rate of the economy. Then we can rewrite our disposable income as y minus, instead of yd, we put ty, because here yd equal to y minus n. So therefore, we put yd equal to y minus ty. Instead of t, we put ty. So then we can rewrite this yd equal to 1 minus t times y. Right? Then we have consumption function. Consumption equal to small c plus y alpha times y. Instead of y, now we have to use yd, disposable income. So when we get the disposable income, we have the definition for disposable income here, y minus t times y. So we replace yd with that. So finally we get c equal to c plus alpha times 1 minus t multiplied by y. In fact, these are rearrangement of our equations. Then we know the national output. National output equal to c plus I bar plus g bar. So then we can write y equal to c plus alpha times 1 minus t times y plus I bar plus g bar, because this is the new consumption function. Instead of c, we put this one. This is new c plus I bar plus g bar. Then you can use the derivatives and get the impact of y. If we are changing, here I put, if we are changing 1 unit of y. So before getting into that point, let's see what happens to our graph. So in our graph, this was c plus I bar in the previous case. Now we are getting c plus I bar plus g bar as our intercept. Intercept is changed from c plus I bar to c plus I bar plus g bar as the new intercept. And the slope also changed. Here slope equal to alpha. The consumption function also had the alpha, but when we introduce government expenditure, our slope will be alpha times 1 minus t. This one, alpha times 1 minus t is the slope. So slope is changed. Now aggregate demand curve is slightly changed. You can see intercept is changed and slope also changed. Now we can say if we change government expenditure by a certain amount, what will happen to our output, which can be easily calculated using the derivatives. So what we can do, we can get the first order derivatives of this y function or the national output function with respect to g. So we put that dy by dg, then we get 1 divided by 1 minus alpha times 1 minus t as the new income multiplier. So I hope you can see the difference compared to previous income multiplier. When we had no government sector, income multiplier was 1 divided by 1 minus alpha. Now, when we introduce the public sector, our income multiplier now changed to 1 divided by 1 minus alpha times 1 minus t. So tax also matters when we introduce the public sector. Again, let's do some simple calculations like as previous, MPC equals 0.75. So we know marginal propensity to consume is 0.75. and the net tax rate equal to 0.2. If it is the case, what is happening to our output if we change GOI by Y by 1 unit? So for that, we can calculate the income multiplier, which is given by 1 divided by 1 minus 0.75 times 1 minus 0.2. This is NT tax rate, and this is the MPC. So the income multiplier is 2.5. So this tells that if we change either income or consumption, government expenditure or consumption by 1 unit, our output will be increased by 2.5 units. Now, if you look at the figures, in the previous case, when there was no government sector, we had income multiplier as 4, which says if we change our investment by 1 unit, our output will be increased by 4 units. In this case, if we change either investment or government expenditure by 1 unit, our output will be only increased by 2.5, which is less than the previous case. Now the question, why it is? Why we are having lesser change in our income? It is because of the leakage. When we introduce the government, there will be leakages from the system. So when we had no government, of course, it was like a circular flow. Everything was moving perfectly. But when we introduce the government sector, then the tax will be a leakage in the economy. Therefore, we are having less output than the previous. There are a few things that we need to discuss with the introduction of the public sector into the economy. That is, as we discussed, government budget deficit equal to the government expenditure minus the tax, that is expenditure minus income. So then we learn G is less than NT. Government expenditure is less than the tax. Then we are having a budget surplus. If there is a less expenditure compared to income, we are having budget surplus. If expenditure is higher than the net tax, we are having budget deficit. That is what we are experiencing in Sri Lanka today. We have a higher budget deficit. Our G is very much greater than NT. If these two are equal, then we say balanced budget, which is very rare. But we try the balanced budget. In fact, if you listen to the budget reading, budget proposal presentation in the parliament, you may have heard the word balanced budget. So they are always telling we are trying to propose a balanced budget. But anyway, government budget is affected by the government expenditure, tax and income. Right? When there is a huge expenditure, the G will be high, so there will be a budget deficit. So when there is less T, then GB will be high, budget deficit will be high. And where there will be a lesser Y, again GB will be high. So this simply tells, if you analyze the present scenario of Sri Lanka from this approach, we can simply say the reason for the failure of the government and the whole economy of Sri Lanka is due to these reasons. We had huge government expenditure. We had a lot of subsidy programs. And we had all these loss-making public entities like Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Ceylon this is Electricity Board, and Sri Lankan Airlines. All these institutions made huge losses. So government expenditure was so high, G was so high. Therefore, budget deficit was very high for a longer period of time, which wanted us to borrow from national and international. When you borrow from international, of course, that is what we are experiencing today. And tax also the same. We had very lower tax rates and people are not paying tax. And when the the new government came into power, they reduced the tax rate significantly. So reducing tax rate will increase the GB. So we are having higher budget deficit. And also for a longer period of time, our output also very small. We are producing very less amount of total output. Therefore, that reduced the net tax. So finally, budget deficit was significantly high. Whenever we are having a large deficit or huge deficit in the budget deficit, we say the country is trying to use expansionary fiscal policies. Like government is trying to increase the aggregate demand through G. Because government believes that aggregate demand is not enough. We say cool down, not heated up. The economy is cooled down. Since economy is cooled down, we need to make some heat up. To do the heat up, what we do, we increase the aggregate demand. So therefore, we say, when we are having a large deficit, we are having expansionary fiscal policies. And if we are having a large surplus, we say contractionary fiscal policies, because we keep our national wealth with our budget. So the spending is less than the income. Income is so high. So then we are having contractionary fiscal policies. But you need to remember one thing, a huge budget deficit is not always a problem. Usually we say a lot of difference, or the huge budget difference when we are having a recession, downtime in our economy. Right? If we are in a recession like today, we have to spend money. Government need to spend money to encourage the investment. Like we need to increase the aggregate demand. Unless we enhance or increase the aggregate demand, it is very difficult to get our economy into normal situation. So therefore, we have a large budget deficit when we are having a recession. And also there will be some narrow downing of the budget deficit, or maybe getting into budget surplus during economic booms. And government budget deficit, we discussed that, is usually financed by the government bonds or the borrowings from domestic and international markets. Borrowing from domestic will not be that much harmful. Then we are buying from the international market, because if we are going to buy from the international market, exchange rate will get affected. So when exchange rate will get affected, that will create a lot of troubles, what we are experiencing today. Right? But anyway, as individual, when the inflation is getting higher, it is better to go for borrowings. Right? So as a country, that is same for Sri Lanka. When inflation is high, it is better to borrow more funds from foreign sector. Keeping the large budget deficit, borrowing from the external sector and put that money in the country, it is good for the national economy. But remember, whenever we are buying, we need to do the debt service. We need to pay the premium. We need to pay the interest. So we learn that when public sector get intervened, the intercept will be changed in the aggregate demand function, and the slope also get changed. And we did some calculations. We understood that the expansionary impact of government intervention will be lesser compared to the without public sector. Like when we calculated that the income multiplier without public sector was 4, but now income multiplier with public sector, it is 2.5, which is less than previous. Remember this one very well. That is, even though we did not specifically say with the economic system without public sector, there are also leakages was equal to the injections, or injections are equal to the leakages, right? Without the public sector, we had savings as the leakages. So then we had the investment. So always investment was equal to the savings. Whatever moved away from the economy as savings got into the system as investment. This is why we had the circular flow running. The same way, when we introduce the public sector, again, we should have the leakages equal to the investment. So which can be denoted like this. Savings and tax. These are the leakages. Savings and tax should be equal to investment and government expenditure. So S plus NT should be equal to I plus G. So we can do the rearrangement. S minus I equal to G minus N. So we can further rearrange and say S minus G bar, because that is the difference between G minus NT. G minus NT equal to GB, government budget deficit. And this is the government budget deficit. Then we can shift this to the other side, this S, right? Then we can rewrite S minus G bar equal to I. Or simply this says the saving investment gap, right? Just say this one. Saving investment gap equal to the budget deficit, or saving minus the budget deficit equal the investment. So now investment are getting decreased. It is not S equal to I. It is S minus GB. What happens when GB is increased? When government expenditure is increased, what is happening? We are having lesser investment. Previously, S was equal to I. Now S minus GB equal to I. Right? So the saving investment gap is determined by the budget deficit. Probably you may not have the word called crowding out. Because of the government intervention in the market, we have the crowding out effect. Crowding out effect means private investors will get away because of the government intervention or the government investment in the market. So there will be lesser amount of private investment, which is known as crowding out. So the crowding out effect. Right. So with that note, we can move into the foreign trade, the final point of this lecture. That is, like the public sector in the economy, when we introduce the foreign sector, there will be certain changes in the economy. Why it is happening? We believe that more than 50% at present situation with the globalization, more than 50% of the economic activities of economy depends on foreign trade. It may be export, it may be import. If you add import plus exports, it will be more than 50%. In Sri Lanka, like it is 70% or 75%. And we are having higher exports as well as higher imports. So therefore, foreign sector also an important entity in the macro economy. Right? So export will be there as X, as we saw in the circular flow. Import will be M as leakages. So export will be an injection because income comes into the economy, and imports will be a leakage because our money will be moving away from the economy. Like budget deficit, then we are having something called trade balance, which is also very popular now in televisions and the media. Trade balance, that is between export and import. When we are having a higher level of exports compared to imports, we are having a positive trade balance. We have a surplus in our trade account. But as usual in Sri Lanka for the last 30-40 years, we are having higher M. Imports are higher than exports. Because of that, we are having negative balance in the trade account. That negative balance of the trade account also partly responsible for economic crisis what we are experiencing today. I think I discussed this in my presentation in the second lecture. Like the budget deficit, we can say what I said now. If export greater than imports, we have a trade surplus. If export less than imports, we have trade deficit. And then X equal to M, we are having balanced trade. Here we assume, again, export are given, autonomous. They are not determined by the economy, right? So exporters will determine, or the export will be determined by the income of the other countries. Like whatever we export today, it is not the role of us. It is the role of the foreign countries. They will decide how much to buy from our country. So therefore, we assume that exports are given, but import are function of output. So depending on the national output or income, we determine our imports. You see now today you can export anything you want. Even though economy is collapsing, you can export, no issue. But imports, we cannot do that because import depends on income. When income high, we can import more. When income less, there will be less imports. Now we have the restrictions because we don't want to import. So therefore, remember, we assume exports are given and imports are a function of output. So that function can be given as M equal to small my. If small m, it is the rate when we change national output by 1 unit, what is the rate? Our imports will be changed, given by M. On the technical word, we are using marginal propensity to import. When your income is increased by 1 rupee, how much you are going to dedicate for imports is given by M. This is why we say it is the marginal propensity to import. Using this, we can redefine our function again. That is output equal to C plus I bar plus G bar plus now X bar, because it is the fixed exports, minus M is not a fixed one, it is small m times Y. This C we know, that is C plus alpha times 1 minus T Y, because we use YD or disposable income in this case. Then we can rearrange the whole equation. Finally, we are getting dy by dx bar. If we change our export by 1 unit, what is the change in our output? So what we can do, we can change our export. Thereby, we can increase our aggregate demand. If we change our aggregate demand by increasing exports, then our output will be increased. This is one more thing that we can do today in Sri Lanka. So we are trying to increase the exports. So this is why government is always worrying and always telling we need to go for export goods and services, export to foreign countries. This is because you can see the multiplier effect with the foreign trade. For that, what I do, I will say MPC equal to 0.75, T equal to 0.2, and M equal to 0.2. Now, if this is the situation, what is the change in output if we change any of the autonomous expenditure? This is the real world scenario. We have foreign trade, we have the public sector. So these functions are given. And then income multiplier will be 1.66 if you solve this. Then you can imagine we had 4 as our income multiplier when we had no public sector and the external sector. When we had the domestic sector and the public sector without international trade, our income multiplier was 2.6 something. But now with the introduction of the public sector and the international trade, our income multiplier is only 1.66. So this tells us when we introduce the foreign trade into our economy, we will be having lesser multiplier effect. This is the reason why we are having lesser multiplier effect. Of course, at home, you can change this import. You can put this import into 0 and see what will happen. You can export whatever you want, but keep import to 0.01 something. This is import restriction. Then check what is happening to income multiplier. And then you will understand why the present government is restricted the imports. Why we are restricting imports. Even though people are not happy, government need to restrict the import. That is, you are putting this small decrease. Or at home, what you can do, increase this value. Increase the imports to 0.4 and see what will happen to the income multiplier. So then you will understand the importance of import restrictions. So this tells us either we can control the imports, thereby we can increase our national income, or we can increase the exports. If we increase the export, that will also increase our national income. So we can move into the potential output compared to the actual output we were having. So again, the final analysis we had in the previous case, we can do the same thing here. At the equilibrium, the injection should be equal to the leakages. So what we do, S plus NT plus M. These are the leakages. And I plus G plus X. These are the injections. So leakages should be equal to the injection because it is a circular flow. Then we can rearrange our equation and get S minus I. That is saving investment gap of a country. Amount of investment of a country depends on two things. One, G minus T, that is the budget deficit. Right? G minus NT, that is the budget deficit or budget surplus. And X minus M, that is export minus import. That is the trade balance. Now you see the Sri Lankan situation. There's a huge deficit here. Budget deficit is so high for a longer period of time. And export and import gap is significantly high for a longer period of time. Trade balance is very high. So there are twin problems. We are having lesser income in the government. We are having lesser foreign income. Right? So the trade balance is negative and high. Budget surplus is negative, which is a budget deficit, and high. So if these both are high, that will say investment will be less. S minus I should be less because this is equal to S minus I equal to these two. So therefore, when these two goes down, this also goes down. So we are having less investment in the country. That is the problem we had for a longer period of time. If you want to understand the current economic crisis from real economic point of view, read a little bit more on this. Then you will understand the problem is not with the person. Problem is with the policy that we had for a longer period of time. So we had free education, free health, lot of free things, where the government expenditure was so high. And we maintained the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Ceylon Electricity Board, Sri Lankan Airline, which are loss-making, absolutely. We increase the government expenditure. And people are not paying their taxes. So the deficit is so high. And we love import. Everyone wants a vehicle. Everyone needs a computer. Everyone needs a superb mobile phone. So everyone tries to import a lot. Whereas nobody is worrying about the export. So we had the less export. So we had the trade balance for a longer period. Then we had the government budget deficit for a longer period, which reduced the investment of the country. To do the investment, what government did? So to make this balance, what government did? It imported investment from the foreign countries. First, it tried borrowing and then investment. Both failed, then got into the market borrowings, sovereign bonds, which put real troubles in the Sri Lankan economy because interest rate was so high and we need to pay them back. So finally, economy got collapsed. So using this equation, you can easily explain how the economy gets collapsed. Just think, if you are increasing this and increasing this, what will happen? This will be increased. So that can be graphically shown like this, because now we are having new aggregate demand curve, which is C plus I bar plus G bar plus X bar minus M. And look at the slope. Slope equal to alpha times 1 minus T plus, that is the slope. So we are having a new slope. The intercept also new. We are having C, small c plus I bar plus G bar plus X bar as the slope, and as the intercept, and slope getting alpha times 1 minus T plus M. Both slope and intercepts are changed. Okay, that brings us to the end of the discussion on aggregate demand. So, but anyway, we discussed the basics. We discussed the basics of macroeconomics and the importance of the GDP calculations. And we learned about the circular flow. So using the circular flow analysis, we started the discussion on aggregate demand. According to Keynesian economic theory, of course, there are different schools of thoughts, like monetary economics theory. This is Keynesian. According to Keynesian economic theory, economies are running with unemployment. So we need to get into our full potential. How to get into the full potential? That is to increase the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand, how we can increase that? Either we can do the government expenditure. So we need to increase the tax. Increase the tax and get higher income, then spend that money on the economy. So the aggregate demand will be going up. Or we can encourage the investment. Either reduce the interest rates or ask bank to provide more loans. Then investors will put more money. So the investment will be increased. Or we can increase the exports. If we increase the exports, still our output will be increased. Or we can reduce the imports. If we reduce the imports, the multiplier effect will get enlarged. If we reduce the government sector, not the deficit, the government sector, then that also will reduce the impact on the multiplier effect. So it will be having higher rate of multiplier effect without government sector. Right? So these are the things that we wanted to explain today. This is a very good lesson. Slowly listen it later and read a bit more and try to understand and explain the present situation of the country using this aggregate demand aspect.